Hey class, today's online lecture is on the control of posture. So to define posture, it's a composite of the positions of all the joints of the body at any given time. When we're standing, we're getting the most information about how to control our posture, and then we get less and less information when we sit down or when we then lie down. So ideal posture is to be stable, maintains the body's mass over its base of support. The body is designed to stand with very little muscular effort, which minimizes stress and strain on tissue, both statically and dynamically. So our automatic responses as to how we control our posture. Okay, responses are typical but can be adapted. Usually there's some short latency, okay, a small amount of time for processing, because when we're standing there's a lot of complex neural circuits, there's a lot of inputs that relate to outputs, because we do sway a little bit with our posture, which causes us to make some postural adjustments, and these are automatic responses. They're not hardwired, but they're pre-programmed and can be reshaped or reprogrammed. So what is postural control? There's three distinct aspects: postural orientation, purposely position the body in a certain way to perform a task. There's postural equilibrium, just maintaining balance. And then anticipatory postural adjustments, which are preemptive corrections to posture to correct for voluntary movement of the limbs. So postural orientation is purposefully positioning our body to accomplish a task. So to provide stability for arm or leg movement, keep the head steady while performing some other task. So we could consider a football receiver running and tracking a ball thrown to them. You know, the more the head moves, the more that ball will end up moving, the more that our body will end up moving as well. A complex task, consider the involvement of biarticular muscles. This could be, you could think of the hamstrings are biarticular muscles. We could think of holding the upper arm horizontal and then flexing and extending the elbow, because we do know that the biceps and the triceps cross two joints. Then we have postural equilibrium, which is to maintain balance. So equilibrium means keeping our weight vector within the base of support. And typically our base of support is about 1 square foot. And stability means we are either at equilibrium or can use muscle activity to return to equilibrium. So think of an inverted pendulum. Okay, think of the center of pressure as the apex of a cone. If our center of gravity travels outside of the cone, we're going to fall. And we'll talk about this when we talk about walking in class. So postural limits of stability, we have about 8 degrees forward, 4.5 degrees backwards, so about 12.5 degrees total. And then generally side to side, 8 degrees each side, about 16 degrees total. And our postural limits of stability, so what happens if we exceed these limits of postural stability? We're going to fall. So again, that inverted pendulum, if you look at that picture right there, if that pendulum falls too far outside the base of support, it's just going to fall, or in our case, we would probably take a step. So it's very hard to balance an unstable mass with a moving base, and this is a common engineering problem. Obviously, we see that there's a small base of support down at the bottom for the Segway. Then you put a person on top of it, so if it can balance, you can fall on a Segway, but you know, it's a mechanical engineering issue that we're constantly trying to solve. So postural sway. So during normal quiet standing, we actually have some type of sway. If you're standing up right now, take your hands off of the counter, you'll feel yourself sway back and forth. We can measure center of pressure and sway with a force platform. So the center of pressure moves as a person sways, and that ends up measuring sway. So some sway is normal. It's not super well understood why we actually sway. Could be a result of noise. So maintaining balance is difficult, requires energy. So some air or noise in the system might be causing sway. Perhaps we allow sway as a trade-off between energetic cost and stability. But it could be that sway is intentional by the CNS as well. So we follow a moving reference point as we sway, and is our CNS constantly exploring the limits of our stability? So again, not super well understood. So normal individuals do exhibit some sway. Many factors can increase sway: age, alcohol, sleepiness, vibrations, disease, so on and so forth, that can make us sway more than normal individuals. Which leads us now to sensory reweighting. So sensory feedback plays an important role in the control of our posture. So what feedback do we use? So we take sensory information and we now reweight that to determine, okay, kind of our equilibrium of our body, of our balance. So vision plays a role. Some people, if you close your eyes and try to balance on one leg, you're going to notice that you're trying to balance, maintain equilibrium, and not fall over. We have the vestibular system, movement of our head, proprioception, muscle length, changes in length, joint angles, and muscle tension, as well as cutaneous receptors on the bottom of our feet that could sense load or vibration. So integration of sensory information from multiple sources requires a weighting of each type of information. In many cases, humans, we've shown the ability to reweight sensory input in response to changing conditions. So we're able to adapt and maintain and control our posture. So if we look at it in terms of when waves come, so if you watch a kid, 1-2 years old, if they go to the ocean and you see the small waves come in, you'll actually see them fall on their butt. Usually children can start to reweight multiple sensory inputs at around 4 years old. So if you look at a 1-year-old standing in shallow water, all of a sudden the wave is moving, the water feels like it's going backwards, and so they're getting all this sensory information from watching the wave, feeling the water come against their legs, and then eventually they fall over because they're not able to reweight the visual input very well. And we manipulate this also through the visual field. And we can cause the visual field to move sinusoidally, so we're kind of testing reweighting right now. So if we cause the visual field to move, we can now see the person sway, and it kind of looks like a sine wave. That's sinusoidally. So the subject will sway and will follow the visual field movement. And we can increase the amplitude of the visual field, so the subject sway will increase in amplitude, but it won't be to the same extent of the visual field. And so we see that there's an intramodal relationship that appears with sensory reweighting. So within a modality being vision, being touch, so on and so forth, which suggests that there's a link exists between sensory modalities and postural control. And we also will see that when one sense is downregulated, another is upregulated to now compensate, again, to maintain that control. There are some time delays, so the nervous system has delays associated with the conduction of nervous impulses and processing information. This could be disastrous for maintaining stability. So how do we compensate? Again, the brain is mysterious. We're still looking into this. Could be feed-forward control or kind of an anticipatory response. Could be intermittent and discontinuous postural adjustments. Could be dead bands of sensory feedback, so no action is taken if the system is within certain limits, as well as the environment. So let's start digging into a little bit of research when we're going to be looking at some perturbations and kind of knocking people off balance. So to start, perturbation. So how do we correct a perturbation, or basically a stumble? The nervous system tends to recruit distal muscles first. So if we're going to sway, so for forward sway, the gastrocnemius will be the first to fire. Again, because it's going to cause plantar flexion, which will bring the trunk back upright. If we start to go backwards, the tibialis anterior will start to fire, which will cause a torque, bringing us forward. Now, to maintain equilibrium, we want to make corrections to stay within limits of stability. At the ankle, we call this an ankle strategy. At the hip, we call it a hip strategy. So ankle is for small error correction and fine control. At the hip, is for larger error correction or more gross control, as well as if the ankle strategy is not effective at maintaining equilibrium. So again, the ankle is mainly for that small error correction and that fine control. So some experiments. Subject stands on a platform. Platform suddenly slides posteriorly, causes forward sway. Gastrocnemius fires. Now the platform suddenly slides anteriorly, causes backward sway. Tibialis anterior will fire. The postural adjustments to external perturbations for this would be stereotypical, right? So we mentioned that if they go forward, the gastrocnemius will fire to plantar flex, bring us upright. If we have backward sway, the tibialis anterior will fire, again, to cause a torque and bring us more upright. Now, in procedure 2, someone is standing on a platform, suddenly slides backwards, causes forward sway and ankle dorsiflexion, which is what we'd expect. Or you could be standing on a platform that suddenly rotates to cause ankle dorsiflexion at the ankle. So there's no forward sway, but causes ankle dorsiflexion. So similar as the first experiment, subject fired the gastroc first. Okay, so this is an actual study, which corrects the action for the sliding platform. However, they had incorrect firing on the rotating platform, in which they actually fell backwards. However, after a few trials, the subjects were then able to respond correctly to both situations. So postural adjustments to these external perturbations were shaped by experience, which shows us evidence that we can reprogram some automatic responses. Now, anticipatory postural adjustments, so we mentioned anticipation earlier, can counteract instability from voluntary movements. So if we're standing in an elevator, you want to push a button, which muscle fires first? Okay, while standing, you try to abduct one of your legs, what happens first? Okay, we usually see that Parkinson's patients have trouble making adjustments, leading them to some falls. But what we see with the first one for the elevator, so this actually causes a shift in the person's center of gravity leading forwards, and balance can be lost unless some compensation is provided prior or along with the movement. So the first sign of EMG activity occurs actually in the large muscles of the back of the leg, the hamstrings. So the hamstrings fire first, on the opposite side of the body from the intended action. This occurs about 60 milliseconds before the actual movement choice. So this could be a type of feed forward action to prepare the legs so that the body does not lose balance. So pretty interesting that when we go to poke something, we notice our hand gets further away from our center of gravity. Our hamstrings actually contract to bring us upright. So back to the start of the lecture, why would adding a second task improve one's ability to balance a stick? And we didn't really talk too much about this as a stick. This is meant I'm just going to take a step back. The balancing experiment, we're not in class, so don't worry too much about this. The last thing I want to end on is stochastic resonance. Sometimes there's a signal that's too weak to detect and can be boosted by adding some type of white noise. And so what this could do, if we look at in terms of, let's look at older individuals, they have a higher tactile detection threshold in their feet, meaning it takes a higher threshold in order for them to detect something. Vibration of the plantar surface has been shown to lower this threshold, and that might actually improve their stability and balance. So this white noise can boost the amplitude of the signal, causing it to resonate with the noise, and now we can actually improve balance and postural control.